I didn't alter the ball in any way.
Regardless of the findings of the internal investigation on the NFL, Ray Rice currently is suspended indefinitely from the NFL.
I got it wrong in the handling of the Ray Rice matter, and I'm sorry for that.
From Deflategate to a handful of domestic violence cases, it was a tough season for the NFL. So have these incidents hurt the NFL's business and brand? What's next for the league? Here to weigh in is Todd Schoenberger, Chief Market Strategist for Hedge Act. And no, in case you were wondering, we're not related. Todd, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Have any of these episodes hurt the NFL's brand? Does the league have an image problem now?
Absolutely. There's no question that it does. It's not about just the off-the-field issues. We're now hearing about some on-the-field issues now. You had the New England Patriots with Deflategate. Now there's a story out about the Atlanta Falcons possibly piping in home noise, manufacturing artificial home noise for their games. So there's a lot of teams that are trying to gain that extra edge, that competitive advantage. But the problem is that for the viewer itself, who is the actual customer of this business, there probably is an end line here, and there's going to be a time where people have just had enough hearing about the cheating, the stories, the domestic issues, everything else, and not to mention about offensive names. So when you going forward, this league has a lot of work to do.
Well, if they do have an image problem or a brand issue, it certainly hasn't been showing up yet in ratings or lower ticket sales. I mean, you look at the Super Bowl, it was one of the highest watched on record, the highest watched, and one could argue Deflategate brought even more viewers to watch the game.
That's true, and if you're looking at a death spiral for the league, I mean, it is going to take time. You're not going to instantly have people that just turn this off, no matter after the Ray Rice ordeal, and then also the Adrian Peterson situation, and then you hear about everything else that's taking place here, and about players being suspended for drug use, animal cruelty charges. I mean, the list goes on and on. People and fans are not just going to give up on their teams and give up on the league instantly. It does take time, and therefore if you're going to have any competitors out there, such as other sports or other ways to attract some of that discretionary income, this actually makes the NFL vulnerable.
Aside from the off-the-field issues, there were a record number of penalties this year that interrupted games. You say that's because of new rules or quote-unquote overregulation by the league. But how does this impact the game-watching experience? Does it get to the point where it turns off fans?
It does. It's very difficult as a fan to be able to watch football now. If you take a look at the NFL rulebook, they have had 28 rule changes or edits to, or additions to the current rulebook since 2009. You have to go back 17 years prior to that for 28 types of edits. So it is a completely overregulated game. It's very difficult to referee. It's very difficult to play, and it's more difficult to watch. So the last thing you want are your customers to being confused watching these games and actually arguing with referees and trying to argue with the human element, because everything that does take place during these games, it is completely arbitrary, and therefore the outcome is going to be arbitrary. The point being is that for the fan, for the common fan, it's very difficult for them to really stick with something that they're not able to see that's concrete, that's simple, black and white, and therefore you're probably going to see a bit of a migration from some of those, some of your hardcore. So your hardcore fans will be there, but the more casual fan will probably look elsewhere.
So then, Todd, what's next for the NFL?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, the NFL really needs to focus back onto their core marketing and also their branding. I mean, one thing that the NFL is its own worst enemy. I mean, what makes the NFL special is its ability to actually have games during a time of the week that every demographic can actually watch. I mean, Sunday afternoons is a perfect time. It's winter time, people are at home, and they can attract people just sitting on the sofa, and it doesn't matter which age or which gender, people are actually going to be rooting for their team. What the NFL has done over the last few years, though, is they've put games on at night. Now you have 3 nights out of every week, you have night games. It's very difficult for the younger fan to actually watch these games, and therefore they're going to be losing that interest. Plus, the NFL is now looking to, or they have been having games overseas, and what that means is then your own fan base can't cheer on their teams. The NFL is somewhat generational, and so you definitely, if you can't pass along that experience to the next generation, then they just will not have the same civic pride with their team and probably look elsewhere for other items. So the NFL really needs to go back to its core roots of really thinking, okay, now how do I attract to the younger generation?
Todd, to your point on generating younger fans, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell says the league is exploring the concept of live streaming regular season games. This is his answer to reaching younger fans who don't have traditional TVs. Will it help the potential attrition rate for younger NFL fans?
I do. I definitely do. I mean, there's really no reason for the American household to have a television now. I mean, the only reason why is for NFL games. So if you have the ability to stream the actual game, the experience to an electronic device, that can only help as far as really reaching to another fan base, another demographic. I personally am looking forward to seeing the Super Bowl on Netflix. I really do believe it will end up on Netflix one day. And plus, I think the commercials will be quite riveting and much more exciting than what we just experienced.
Well, you've got to imagine if the NFL does start streaming its own games, that's got to be a positive for them as far as an additional revenue stream.
Well, the NFL actually tested this a bit with Twitter. They actually would put replays on Twitter when they would maybe a quick 15, 20-second play, and they actually went to test and see what kind of reaction they would get from their fans, and it was clear as day that it was overwhelmingly positive. So they realized that this is a 21st century world, that they need to really they need to move into that direction as far as offering that type of cutting edge technology that can only help their fan base down the line, and also might actually be able to help them if they do want to pursue other international markets. This and maybe expansion on an international scale. This would actually help them a little bit more, obviously, because then you can actually have games that are on at a regular time in those overseas markets.
All right, one more question before we wrap up. For the past couple of years, a couple of congressmen have tried to no avail to strip the NFL of its tax-exempt status. If it were ever passed, what would that mean for the league? How big of a tax bill are we talking about?
It's a stupid idea, and here's why. Because you want the NFL to remain a nonprofit entity. One thing to keep in mind, though, and this is what the public needs to understand, the NFL does pay taxes on $9 billion of revenue. There is a certain amount of revenue from the teams when they pay their dues into that nonprofit that are not taxed. That amount, and plus a few other ancillary items, it amounts to a little over $300 million. The point being is that what you don't want is to have the NFL actually itemizing their deductions, because now that's just going to really raise many eyebrows in the court of public opinion. So you don't necessarily want the NFL to be a for-profit entity. It's great to say, okay, this $9 billion industry is not paying taxes, but that is not the case. It's a very small fraction, so it's best just to leave them.
Great points. Todd, thanks so much for the insight. Always great to see you.
Thank you, Jennifer.